John,
Hello.
nice to see you. Just a reminder that we'll ask you to mute yourself unless you're being introduced or as a presenter, or and John will be doing that. Or if you're going to be asking a question, which will be coming up in the program several times. And so,
Hi, Bev.
hello. Hello, Anne, David. All right.
Hi, Gail. Greg.
Okay, some more people.
Jeremy.
So we're going to wait just a minute. We're going to start. Hi, Jeremy.
There's Gail.
One.
Great faces.
Who is that?
All right. And so, John, any other guests that you know of?
We're missing Mary, who was confirmed, and that's it on the confirmed side. And then there's Laura Walters, who's always
Just
where you
joined.
want her to be.
And I
Always
got
where
Mary
you
here
want
as
her.
well.
Now?
Oh, Mary's here? Oh, there's Mary Clayton.
But now she's here.
I think we're all here.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and have Matthew, our
If y'all
producer,
didn't want to join video.
start the recording.
We don't show up.
And just a reminder, if you would, to mute yourself until you're introduced, or you have a question, that would be just wonderful. We won't hear any feedback or extraneous noise behind. And Matthew, have you begun that recording then? And great.
Yep.
Okay, so we will begin. Good evening and welcome to the fifth and final program in our Pandemic Forum series. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Deacon Gail Britt, Minister of Hope and Healing for American Lutheran Church and Shepherd of the Valley Lutheran here in Grand Junction. Tonight, we present our final installment in the Pandemic Forum series as we focus on the effects of the coronavirus on some of the most vulnerable among us. As John Mok-Lamme, Director of Karis Inc, will be our featured presenter on COVID and the homeless in the Grand Valley. He's also going to update us on the homeless shelter now housed in the ALC Fellowship Hall as well. Joining John tonight are several guest presenters who share the same passion he has on this topic. So we know you're going to be informed, you're going to be educated, and hopefully enlightened by the end of this program. I do have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. You will be muted throughout the program, or you can mute yourself. With the exception of live question and answer periods. Now, John will be interviewing his guests tonight.
Former NFL players are hits extend beyond.
Then you're invited to unmute yourselves and ask a question or share something from your own experiences. Otherwise, throughout the program, there will be opportunities to type in your question if you'd rather do that, or share something in the chat portion of your screen. And now I'd like to introduce our featured presenter tonight. John Mok-Lamme is the director of Karis Inc, a nonprofit organization with research-based services and quality housing for Mesa County youth without homes to transition to a new future of hope and promise. John was formerly the director of Homeward Bound of the Grand Valley and was a founding member of the Grand Valley Coalition for the Homeless and the Colorado Network to End Youth Homelessness. For the past decade, John has also served as an advisory committee member on homeless youth and has presented multiple times to a national audience on the topic. John has been married to Christine for nearly 35 years and is the father of two boys, David and Evan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Mok-Lamme. Take it away, John.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gal. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I had hoped to have a Lutheran mug that says change the name, which is my current campaign. to inspire the Lutheran Church to think of a new name. So call me if you want to talk about that. But that's not the topic tonight. I'm really excited to introduce you some just incredible people here today, people that have really borne the burden of the COVID crisis in the community of folks without homes. I promise you, if we had put go cams on the heads of these people and produced documentaries, each of them would just have left you in tears. And so I just want to introduce you to people that have really done unbelievable work and under incredibly difficult circumstances. So I'm going to just go as folks come up on my screen. So first, Bev Lampley, who works at Catholic Outreach, has gone to come to every COVID meeting that we have had, and has been really working in the area of rent relief and mortgage relief. And so probably the people on the call probably knows the most about preventing homelessness during the crisis. Laurel Walters has been kind of come off the board of Karis to just do incredible work. Was a volunteer down at the hotel program when the big outbreak happened. We believe contracted COVID by hauling someone into an ambulance. She's also helped us stand up our first extra shelter at the Strive House. Has played a role in helping 2 to 3 people who have died during the crisis because of terminal illness die with dignity, and just has done an incredible job. I want to say too that Laurel House is named for Laurel Walters, and Laurel House is our permanent supportive housing project out on 12th Street, 34 bedrooms of permanent supportive housing for homeless youth. Mary Clayton is an educator who Dan Carlson, who has a gift for personnel, picked out of a lineup and hired for us. Mary provided street outreach to folks in the camps, was instrumental in helping to set up the church's shelter, is now our adult director, so seeing all our adult work. It did a lot of work at the hotels as well, and the hotels were really an overflow program and then also an emergency program for folks that contracted COVID. So she continues to work. I think she signed up for 15 hours a week and is now the director of our adult programs. I should say too that one thing I didn't say about Laurel and Mary both is that they've arranged for, at this point, tens of thousands of dollars to go into the camps to help people at camps, everything from hand warmers to tents. So they've been instrumental in helping people make sure that folks that are at camps have the supplies they need. And then Laurel is currently heading up the vaccination effort along with Bev, and I think Laurel's taking the lead on that piece, and it's going to be housed by Catholic Outreach's Day Center, and we're super excited about that. So Greg Moore has just really ridden the wild horse of the COVID. Greg's the executive director of Homeward Bound and oversees the community's 2 largest adult shelters. And so the largest outbreak was at Homeward Bound, and then Greg they have fed along just thousands of people in the emergency program, or hundreds of meals in the emergency program at the hotels, also provided assistance to those people, has done incredible work with their testing program to keep everybody safe, and also contracted COVID in the midst of the crisis. So these are the best people, and you just, gosh, I'm just so thankful just to be around them. And I will tell you that Greg has to leave early, so we may want to start there. So I will just, honestly, I think the best thing is to just let you ask questions. If it stalls a little, I'll jump in with questions. But these are people that have just done incredible work in this area. I will tell you that Bev and Greg and I probably know more about the overall issue of homelessness in the Valley. Laurel and Mary are new, and Laurel probably knows more on the call about the issue of folks that are medically in need or compromised in homelessness, because she was the chief operating officer at Rocky for a very long time. And Mary has a lot of anecdotes about people on the street. That's Laurel too, because they've both been in the camps and on the streets. And that's actually everyone on the call, probably with the exception of me. And of course, I'll field the youth calls. So I'll just open it up for questions. And if it stalls out, then I will just jump in. I do want to say hey to Kathy, who was on the committee for ALC and just did incredible work to get the existing church shelter open. And then also to Ann Wenzel, who arranged for funding, helped us out. So we're really super thankful to everyone who pitched in. So questions?
I'm just thinking, just off the top of my head, I'm just because Greg does have to leave a little bit early, John, maybe to talk a little bit about the overall situation and then maybe get into the specialties of those that are presenting tonight too, so we can get just a little more information,
Sure.
what it looks like right now. Yeah.
Great. And great. As you answer that question about sort of where we are overall, is there a moment that just stands out to you that just kind of drills into your mind what it's been like to be the head of Mesa County's really largest adult emergency shelter? Was there just a moment in it where it crystallized for you? And then give us a sense of, more to Gail's point, an overall sense of things.
Thanks, John, and everybody. First of all, I'd like to say that John is understating dramatically his role in all of this. He has stepped up and led the COVID-19 group that formed faithfully and consistently since last March. And had he not helped the group coalesce and plan and been insistent in driving, I think we would have seen some tragically very worse results than we have. So John, I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you for your leadership during this time, because it's meant the world to me and personally. And in terms of crystallizing it, I think, we spent several months thinking and planning for the possibility of an outbreak. And it's one thing to think and plan about it. It's another thing to actually have it happen, and have it happen as rapidly and dramatically as it did for us at Homeward Bound. I think when at one point we had over 70 people in isolation in the hotels, and the realization that we had 70 people that could potentially get very, very sick really brought home to me the tremendous need as a community to cooperate with one another and how reliant we truly are on one another. And had we not done all that work, I can't imagine what the outcome would have been. But to know that there was a whole team of people who just stepped up and put their lives on the line to serve people in that situation, just, I don't have words to adequately describe the power of that time and how I saw people serving and sacrificing in ways that only those who are truly operating in God's love and in his service would be willing to do in those circumstances. So I think at that point, I realized even more fully than I have how important every single one of us is in making things happen and providing the kind of service we provide.
Greg, what's your overall sense of things now about where we are as a community with homelessness? And I know you talked to Senator Bennett, and I think we all agreed we're not that much different from where we were.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, we see the potential looming, and I know Bev would speak to this, of there's been some rent relief and some foreclosure prevention and that kind of thing. But I have a sense that we could be in for a dramatic increase in homelessness once those government programs truly come to an end. And the people that we serve that are 30% of AMI or below typically just do not have the economic wherewithal to withstand much. And so I think Bev would speak to this, but I'm very concerned that we are unprepared both in terms of capacity and just ability to meet the needs, should that eventuality come to pass. I've seen surveys that are indicating we could see a 30 to 40% increase in homelessness before this is all said and done. For us, that would be a huge number of individuals to try and serve, get meals, get housed under cover somewhere. I think the longer term prognosis is we will have to continue to cooperate and work very cooperatively to meet the needs of the potential needs that we see coming down the pike.
I think, and I want to turn it over to Bev and just to make a couple of comments on that. And first of all, I think there is going to be some really big federal money from what I can tell coming down the pike to try to get at more permanent solutions. But in order to access that, we will have to be more agile than we've ever been. We won't be able to have 3-year lead times on projects. That's what Laurel Type's house has taken. If you look at Catholic Outreach's new project, Mother Teresa, it's going to take 2 to 3 years. We're going to have to be able to compete very quickly for dollars. And I don't think we have ever done that. It doesn't mean we can't, but we've never done that before. If we're going to be able to pivot from all this emergency money into something permanent, and the dollars are going to be there, but folks in Denver and large metropolitan areas, they're probably shovel ready. So I think that's a big issue. The other thing I would point out is to say that the entire problem is just incredibly either created by, exacerbated by the national housing crisis and the lack of stock in housing. And I've talked to 2 to 3 realtors this week who say, everything's being bought up by people out of town or being leased by people out of town. So Bev, could you just answer those same questions? What's a moment, is there a moment where you just thought, wow, this is homelessness and COVID? And then could you just speak to anything you want about the overall sense of where we are as a community now?
Sure. And I'll give you a little background. John and I and others have been counting homeless people since 2005, 2006. And we usually come up about the same number, actually. And we touch about 500 people. And we know that there are about 500 more just because of where we survey and just knowing it. And which means we've created lots of permanent supportive housing. We have lots of vouchers. We have lots of assistance over the years. So we're treading water. So we're housing the same number of people, but we're not making any progress. And what COVID has done is brought a whole other class in that never thought they'd have to be here. Our agency normally in 6 months period would probably do 70,000, maybe 100,000 of rental assistance, maybe. We've done over 300, almost $400,000 in the last 6 months. We've got about 300 more that's coming in. That's not near enough, and we'll have to scrounge and we'll find some more. These are people that were in service jobs primarily, restaurants, quick stops, those kinds of jobs, and they're losing everything. And they're afraid, that moratorium has just exacerbated the problem. And I should never use that word because I can't say it. And it's just made the problem so much worse because people think, oh, I don't have to pay it right now. Well, it's going to come due. And these bills are huge. And people don't, and so if we look at these folks that had jobs, that had lives, and they're falling into homelessness, we're not prepared to take care of that. We have less than 1% rental vacancy rate in 1-bedroom apartments. These folks will be on the street with children. We already had a problem with homeless children, according to McKinney-Vento. So this is just a huge, huge issue. The one thing I want you to understand, in addition to what has happened to the homeless population and the middle class and all of us, the homeless population probably more than any, and they're the invisible ones, the ones that you want to move along so you don't have to see them and do all that. But they, their library shut down, restaurants shut down, everything shut down. And then there was winter and there was no place to go. Greg was limited in how many people he could take into the shelter. So they were camping. So we did the camp. John is amazing when it comes to the camp people. He and I met with them, and he continued, and I just kind of help out when I can. And the camp people are different, but they all have stories. They all have lives, and we have to know these stories. And this impact has been huge, and it continues to be huge. You know, we talk about the mask or whether or not that's bull. You know, these are lives we're talking about. And, you know, yes, real assistance every day we get people coming in, and we're doing it. This group, you know, one thing we've kind of hinted at, I've chaired the Homeless Coalition for a number of years. And one thing about this community, we collaborate, we don't compete, and we have great relationship with each other and with the city, which is unheard of. And by the way, we had the greatest housing authority in the state, bar none, and with them. And we came together, and we had some CDBG money, and there was an opportunity for us to come together and make apply for a grant for the whole amount, to take care of rental assistance, to take care of the security at the hotel for the people we were housing for quarantine, to do other things. And they accepted it. So we got, you know, $145,000 for rental assistance from that, you know, to help our community. This is a huge problem. It will remain a huge problem, even after we stop wearing masks, even after we can go back into churches. It's a huge problem.
That's a really great point. Yeah, Craig, go ahead.
I just was listening to Bev talk about the children. We built a new Pathways Family Shelter. We had set aside 28 beds for families and their children. That was almost 2.5 times what we had at the North Avenue shelter. We thought surely that'll be sufficient. We filled those in the first week. And right now, tonight, we have over 60 family members at Pathways Family Shelter. And we've had 2 new families come in this week. As fast as we're able to help somebody find a place or they move on, we have other people that are showing up.
And you're getting another one tomorrow.
Yeah. And we have everything from a brand new newborn set of twins that's a month old, all the way up to teenagers that are about ready to graduate from high school. So the impact on the families when they find themselves with us, I can't begin to describe the level of trauma that they come in the door with. As Bev said, because they've lost jobs, they're just showing up in a state of desperation that's different than what we've seen before.
Yeah.
I think that part of that is when you can build out enough, then the chronic population, you begin to see in the emergency populations, non-chronic individuals. And so what's happened to Homeward Bound, I think, is it's built out big enough. So now you're seeing, you know, families that we're not accustomed to seeing as homeless, yes. Right?
Yes.
And I know Greg and I both last year talked about having employees that were homeless. We both had employees. We have had employees that worked for us and were in our programs both at the same time. And they came in those doors in different directions. We didn't know, right? We didn't know they were coming into the program side and the employment side. So I think that I just want to comment on Bev's point, just a point of clarification. So what Bev is saying is, as we measure the number and it holds relatively static, that's strange in the fact that we built so much capacity, because 20 years ago, there was no Homeward Bound. I mean, Homeward Bound is only 20 years old, I think, and was only 16 beds. And so 20 years ago, there was no permanent supportive housing. There was no transitional program. There were no vouchers for vets. There was no youth programs. There was no St. Matthew's and St. Mark's and St. Benedict's. And so all of that capacity is not lowered the number. I do want to get some other folks in. So let me go to Laurel, and then Bev, I'll try to get back to you. But Laurel, I know you spent really your whole, well, that's not quite true. You've been involved in homelessness a very long time, but you probably have gotten more hours in the last year than you had probably in the last 5. So could you tell us, what was it like for you? Was there a moment that you look to and just think, well, that was that moment when I knew I was in it thick? And just give us a sense of your impression as somebody who's been on the ground throughout this thing.
Sure. So, when I worked at Rocky, we were responsible for Medicaid outreach. So we did a lot of kind of homeless support in that role. But it was when I was in that organization, the notion of serving the homeless population was really more abstract. And so when I retired and kind of stepped in to help, set up some of these programs and kind of play a role with some of the agencies, it was a pretty profound experience to start understanding the depth of the difficulty of providing services to this population and the depth of difficulty for these individuals to actually get services. So there are lots and lots of services available, but the menu is very complex, and navigating what you're eligible for and what you need to line up for first and so forth requires somebody who has the brilliance of a Bev or a Greg to help folks navigate that. And so I think one of the most remarkable things to me is something that Greg spoke about early on, which is when we did have 60 or 70 people in the hotels when we were isolating folks. It really did take everybody coming together to support that population. So we had the health department, we had volunteer docs that were supporting the health department. We had Homeward Bound, which stepped up in a huge way to help us continue to feed the folks over there. That was a big burden on Homeward Bound, and they did it very gracefully. Bev continued to serve the population that supported a number of these folks, and so it really was it was really a remarkable effort. I think John made mention to some of the things that have been really notable during this period. One of the things that's come to the forefront for me specifically is that we do have a handful of folks that we've identified in this population that are terminal or had terminal conditions. Those folks have always been in this population, but this season kind of really brought them to the fore. And so there really are limited options available for these individuals. And we've been working on ways to kind of close some gaps there. Not only is it complex to be homeless and access services, but it's like twice as complex if you're homeless and terminal and trying to access services. And so that's become something that we're trying to spend some time on, closing a gap there. And then I think I would just kind of wrap up by saying that as the population as a whole sort of navigates this trajectory, we of course there's a huge emphasis on getting vaccinations available for this population. It's a tricky population. It's very transient, and they don't have the same resources that you or I would have as it relates to getting someplace to get your vaccine, or coming in twice, or keeping a schedule, or being outreached on the phone and may not have email, and all those things that we all take for granted are just not things that these folks necessarily have access to, including things like an ID. And so it's been some heavy lifting to kind of stand up a clinic that is going to provide the single dose vaccinations for this population. But we're excited to kind of get that on the ground and going tomorrow. It's taken some time to get there, and Bev has been gracious enough to allow us to use the day center, which is where a number of folks frequent already, so they're familiar and feel safe there. And so we're eager to provide that service tomorrow, and we're looking forward to seeing kind of how that comes together.
I think that phrase "heavy lifting" really summarizes a lot of the work. It just felt almost despairing at times, and then it's almost like there's just cement around your boots, that everything seems to take twice as long, 6 times as long. Just getting the first thing I think we did were the toilets. We put toilets at the camps, and those toilets still exist, and we put them in the camps, and it was just painful. It was really, 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 it was funny at times. And then I think one toilet got a police escort because there was some controversy about it. But it was really tough to get that done. And then the other thing was, once things were up and running, they seemed to go okay. Once the hotel program, Greg hasn't talked about, what they're doing now, but what Greg is doing now is like a system. They test everybody regularly. They have isolation things, but it really has been heavy lifting. The church took us an inordinate amount of time, we thought, to get open. And now it's open and things will be going well. So Mary, do you want to answer that question just about what, was there a moment in this where you just thought, oh my gosh? And also I'm curious to hear, like, you had very little homeless experience, right? You're an educator, you just get thrown into this thing. And Mary lost her job. She used to travel around the world educating people, and that kind of went away with COVID. It's a good thing she didn't find all the rent relief that Bev had for her. So anyhow, Mary, go ahead and tell us what it's been like for you and what your reflections are as somebody who's pretty far from the.
It's definitely been a learning experience for me. I was actually out of the country this time last year when everything shut down. So circumstances sent me back here to my hometown. So while I had experience with a lot of poverty and homelessness in other countries and cultures, this has been my first time to actively engage with that population in this community, which has been an experience I'm really thankful for growing up here. I've known we have a homeless population, but getting to interact with people and try to help those who are wanting to change their circumstances. John, you asked what kind of that moment was. And I think for me, it was one day when I was sitting doing intake, listening. As Bev said, these are people and they all have stories, whether they are camping because they want to be, or circumstances just added up, or COVID hit and all of a sudden this is the first time they're ever facing this. But I get to hear those stories regularly when I speak with individuals to see if they would be interested in our program or be a good fit for our program. And it just sort of hit me one day as I was listening to someone pour their heart out and share their life story. Wow, these people, these stories I've always been so curious about. And now it's my job to not only hear these stories and see these people, but have the chance to give them an opportunity, even if it's temporary, give them a place where they can stay and get out of crisis mode. And I think one thing that's really amazing in our shelters is we have case managers there. So in addition to just providing a safe space, they have one-on-one help trying to navigate those resources that Laura was talking about, which can be so daunting and very confusing and challenging to navigate. So our case managers have done an incredible job of helping our residents navigate those resources, helping them get lined up with IDs, with receiving Social Security, disability, helping them apply for housing vouchers. The past couple of weeks, they've even been able to help a couple of residents start going to look at apartments, which is huge because there is not a lot of housing. So even getting to go and see an apartment brings a lot of hope. And we just keep praying that something will come through for at least some of these individuals who are not, they are new to homelessness. So whether they're new to it or whether it's chronic for them, it's amazing to have this opportunity just because of everyone who's come together to provide these resources right now.
Thank you. Let's go to Bev real quickly and then we'll go to questions.
I think you see the difference here. This is why it worked here. And this is why, because look at the people that have talked. They all care. They all care and listen to the stories. One thing I want to remind, I'm looking at the people that are listening, the largest population, the growing number of population who are homeless are from 50 to 70 plus. And for us as a country, we need to think about that.
And it's aging. There's no question the research. You can Google New York Times article on aging homelessness, it's absolutely aging. So just questions that folks have, you can direct them at one or all of us. Gail, or Kathy rather.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. I don't even know, what are the numbers at Homeward Bound as far as how many beds are there now? is it strictly for men? Are there still families there?
So I can't give you the numbers, I know it's about 100 on the North Avenue side, and they're single men, and I think the women are still there, even though they want to move the women to Pathways. And there are about, I think Greg said 60 families at Pathways right now. So that's where I think that's where it's at right now, 60 families and about 100, 110.
I think there are 165 beds at Pathways total.
And I think there are 60 families. I don't know what that is.
Right,
Kathy,
right.
your other question, Kathy?
Yes, so I'm familiar with, the residents at the church, and one individual, at least one, has a housing voucher, and he's talked about how he has a 3 to 4 month wait. And I'm just wondering if somebody could talk about what does that mean as far as what he'll have to pay in rent? What really are his options for finding something? And
So that's very easy to understand. He will pay 30% of his income. So if he has a Social Security check for 800, he's going to pay 30% of that. So that's his max. He can only pay 30%. He will take the voucher out, and you can see it's kind of a neoconservative idea, right? That you let the market, match the housing, and the voucher is matched to AMI, area median income. And so the individual takes the voucher out and tries to find someone. The problem, in my mind, and there is a bill to correct this in the state, is that you're allowed to discriminate against folks with vouchers. So, if Bev comes up and said she has a voucher and I have cash, lots of times landlords are going to take the person with the cash. So that's what that is. And a lot of times it does take navigation. And I will tell you, at Karis, when we get vouchers, a lot of what we do is leverage on board members. We lean on board members who have extra housing units. We cash in favors. We promise if they do damage, we will back the voucher up. It's very hard to just take a voucher out on the market and use it. Now, those are called tenant-based vouchers, the vouchers with the tenant. Project-based vouchers, Kathy, are a different thing. Laurel is all project-based voucher. The room itself has the voucher. The youth does not have the voucher. The unit itself, and every unit at Laurel House, all 34, has a tenant-based voucher. But what you're talking about is what I'm talking about is a project-based voucher, and what you're talking about is a tenant-based voucher.
The other thing you need to understand, Kathy, is this: the rental stock availability, like 1 bedroom, which is typically what the person you were talking would be trying to find, is less than 1%.
It's just horrible right now.
Yeah,
That's why we can all help by building granny units in the backs of our houses, by increasing the stock. Anything you can do, increase the housing stock. In Berkeley, they're going to divide every lot in half. They will allow you to divide every lot in half. And that's why we can also help as neighbors by not opposing high density housing. It's like every time we say, no, not in my backyard, we think about saying that for a shelter, but that's a real problem when we say that for an apartment building, because it keeps, many people cannot afford a 1,700 square foot home. Kathy, go ahead.
So I'm thinking of places like Radican Tower. There was a new apartment building, I think, over by 7th Street Deli. There's a new one being built on Patterson by the fire department. Is that all low income?
Depends
It's not.
Radican is. Radican is what's called project-based. The voucher sits inside of Radican. No voucher, you don't get into Radican. It's a project-based, just like Laurel. Other questions? I think that's really difficult to note, that we ask people like Mary and Laurel to do all the time, is navigate with homeless people that are at the church to build bridges. And we often say that the bridges are not fair because there's nothing at the other end of them. So you build rapport, you build trust, you buy lunch, you get an ID, you get maybe you get the stimulus check, you get a primary care provider. But when you walk across the bridge and they're ready for that housing, it just doesn't exist. We just don't have enough housing stock for any level of income in this community.
The other thing you need to know, and we as a community need to know, that because the stock is so narrow, that we have, believe it or not, we have unscrupulous landlords who will tack on everything they can, like $200 for signing a lease, a lease renewal, $50 for posting the lease, and we have to, as a community, again, to try to talk about that, because that's not right. That's discriminatory. Sure, you and I might pay it. I frankly wouldn't, but we might pay it. But these folks can't. Every dime is important.
I just want to point out Ann's question that churches in America do have so much square footage. I mean, there's just so much square footage in churches. Now, our church, ACL, doesn't have a lot of extra square footage because we've condensed down, right? We sold our big building and, we're in a much smaller building, but we have a monstrous lot. And that lot is zoned R6, I think. So we could easily put 5 to 6 units up on that lot without a lot of trouble. And so I think churches can be involved in that, in the solution of donating land, of selling land affordably, of, being willing to be part of that solution, because churches are sitting on a lot of land. You go to look at First Baptist Church, and the amount of square footage at 7th and Grand is incredible. And the size of that congregation is probably less than 50.
Yeah.
So they could easily use our church in the afternoons or the early mornings, and we could take that whole building and convert it into housing. I think a lot of it is that mindset of saying, hey, let's just everybody do it. In Seattle, every church has the right to 10 homeless people. You can house 10 people in every church without a permit. And of course, Seattle's one of the worst places in the country for it. So Laurel and Mary, do you want to talk a little bit about, Jeremy, go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how bad is the situation in Grand Junction versus like a comparable city of the same size, same average income, et cetera?
I think it's much better. I mean, when I first came to Grand Junction 10 years ago, I came from LA, and I used to joke, this wasn't a great joke, but I say the solution to LA homelessness is to bus everybody to Grand Junction, because the numbers are, you're going to wait 20 years for a voucher in LA. Now, they do have Prop H, and Prop H funds $750 million annually in housing. They housed 30,000 people in LA through last year. Now, they had 20,000 people come into the system, Jeremy. So they're not treading water, they're behind. So I think most large municipalities are far worse off than we are. And part of that goes to, that just evidences the fact that the idea that we think that people move around in homelessness is really, they're transient in the sense that they're always moving inside your community. But there are not large numbers of people going to San Francisco or coming here, and nobody writes on the bathroom, free lunch at the Catholic Outreach in LA, and people grab onto a bus. People are attached to their communities. Other questions?
That's a really good point, because most of our homeless here are residents. They've been here their whole lives.
Right. It's a misnomer that they're outside the zip code.
Yeah.
We do have 3 kids come up from Arkansas once after graduation in a car their grandmother gave them to get free pot. It was the absolute worst situation in the history of the world. We had to bus them home after they ruined the car. It was unbelievable. It's horrible. Oh my gosh. Anybody else, other questions? Mary, do you want to give us an update on how things are going at ALC Shelter and at Victoria House?
Can do that. Excuse me. So Victoria House is the first shelter that we opened up, where we have 8 rooms and can have maximum of 10 people there. And we have had, let's see here, trying to do numbers off the top of my head real quick, about 6 people that have been there consistently since we opened that up the beginning of December. We've had a couple other people that went through there and have left, either passed away, had to leave the program for personal reasons, or we even just relocated a client back to Texas to be with his family. So that was a really the most positive of having someone pass through there and leave the facility before they.
How did they get to Texas, Mary? That seems
Yeah, so
strange.
by we, Mary means she
Yeah.
drove 40 hours to take this individual back to their home in Texas.
Oh,
It was worth it to see the family, just happy to have him there, and to know that's one person that when this program ends, we don't have to worry about where he'll go and how he'll get through another year on the streets on his own, especially as he's aging.
Yeah, and he was incredibly vulnerable, so it's a win to the 10th degree. He was not somebody who could continue to survive on
the
the streets.
savings is outrageous. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous to this community to get him housed with his mom.
Can I give a success story about the Victoria House? Or I think
Sure.
a story. There's a woman there who I've worked with for 3-4 years anyway. And she's wheelchair bound. She lived for 2 years in the back of a van, wheelchair bound, had people helping her in and out. And most of that time, the windows on the van were all punched out. And we found her a place. She wanted to go inside, she said. And we found her a place in Radican Towers. And she went there and she was miserable because she felt so guilty that she was inside. And those friends that helped her in and out of the van were outside. And so she let them in, which caused bother with the Radican Tower people. And we all understood that. And so she elected to leave, and and then back on the street. When COVID hit and John and Laurel and the folks started to put together Victoria House, they found her. And well, maybe a little help, but they found her. And she went and she started to flourish. And then just about 2 weeks ago, after trying for 18 years to get SSI, we finally were able to secure it for her. And so now, not only has she been able to live safely at Victoria House because of that work and the work of Laurel and Mary and Brittany and the rest, John, but she has a future. And that's what this is all about, one person at a time we're dealing with through this crisis. And thank God we have the way to do it.
Amen. I want to give a shout out to Dan too, who was really instrumental for Karis in setting up that shelter too, and Valerie's husband who works for us. And I'm sorry he's not here tonight, but did yeoman's job in helping us get that place open. And you just see the power of housing. And of course, the research is all clear that people thrive in housing. I mean, people thrive in housing. Mary, anything else?
I was just going to update on ALC as well, since I'm sure people are curious about that one. And of course, none of these shelters are, none of them are perfect. None of them are without struggles or fault, but those little stories of success really are what keep everyone going, I think. And so at ALC, we've also had multiple people pass through there. We currently have 7 residents there. We have 4 to 5 that are in the intake process, hopefully in line to move in there soon. Soon meaning once they finish their quarantine process, so that we can add them in with the others. And we had 4 people that were in there for a time, and for whatever reasons, they needed to move on and go elsewhere. We've also had, thanks to Kathy and her help, we've had animals stay there as well. For a while, I thought we'd have more animals than people at that shelter. But we currently have 2 dogs there. There were 2 cats for a while. And so things are going well there. Our case managers there have been working really hard to help those people be able to access these resources. And a lot of those people are very motivated to move forwards. We have a very different dynamic at ALC than Victoria House. And, but again, no one's story is the same. I think a lot of the people who are ALC have found themselves in homelessness, specifically due to COVID, while there are still some who it's been a chronic issue for them, but regardless, they're able to have a place that they're all so thankful for. And even through the frustrations and knowing it's not ideal, they see what's going on there, and they are so thankful just for that space and for that opportunity to try again.
And I should say the purpose behind both these programs was to find people that we knew were super vulnerable, because Homeward Bound is not a 24-hour shelter that couldn't, and the day center was closed, or the library was closed, people couldn't get anywhere. We figured there were some people that if they got COVID were so likely to die that we needed to plan a place for those people that were the most vulnerable. And so that's what those two programs were about. And I think they really have filled a niche, and you just see that there is such a need to get people that are vulnerable off the street and into permanent housing. And really, Homeward Bound is not a solution for those folks. It just isn't, because now, so for some of the families that can stay all day, that's true, but it's not true for adults. We really need some longer term housing for folks that are super vulnerable like this. And who steps into this place, we're still not sure of after COVID. Who stays in this area around the super high vulnerable in the camps? We don't even know who that is yet. And I do think that Karis has said we're trying to sell it, we're trying to give it away to an adult provider, but also we have, I think, committed that we will not leave the space empty. And some of you have probably heard that I'm transitioning out. I'll leave in October, but I think that's a board level commitment. Oh, Kathy, I'm so sorry. So we're behind on mailing the letters, Kathy. Karis will stay in the space around the most vulnerable and folks in camps, but it is a gap, and to use your influence to say, hey, how do we get there and fill that gap? Other
We as a
questions?
community will sort it out. We'll sort it out because we've learned so much from this.
Other questions? I want to talk a little bit, just kind of from a pastoral perspective, about how to be involved. And first of all, I'm going to say, I really believe in calling, and you could be on a video call like this for every cause in the planet, and every day feel the need to do something. And I think a lot of it does have to do with call and what are we called to do, and what is your area, and my wife and I live in the house we raised the boys in, and we've never had a child in this home. We've never had, except our own two boys. And part of that is because we know our limitations. My wife's a therapist, I run a charity. We don't have the emotional bandwidth to have a homeless person in the house with us, along with all the others. We're not all called to do everything. And so I just want to release people to say, when you come to something like this and you go to bed and you say, well, I should be doing more. And maybe you shouldn't be doing more. Maybe you should be doing less. It's not for us to say, and so I just want to first say that. And then the second thing I want to say to you, as you think about it, is so much is possible. For whatever reason, the church has really been in isolation away from real communities of poverty, unless you're a church in that poor neighborhood. Privileged people in churches have really never been baptized into helping the poor. And that's not our fault if we sat in the pews. We were raised like that. We went to beautiful summer camps. Our churches are gorgeous. Well, I miss that sanctuary so much. It's all I can do to keep my voice from breaking. That's the way we were raised. We weren't raised with grabbing homeless people and letting the church smell because that's what Jesus wanted, and having people yell and scream in the middle of the Eucharist. We weren't trained to do that. We were trained to be together in socioeconomic groups that made sense to us. And that's not our fault. And in order to break out of that, it would take a lot, an awful lot. And so I think recognizing that the model we have is class-centric. It is. We go to church with people of our income levels. And getting out of that model is very tough. And so this is one place where ALC has been able to be out. I just want to say how much I miss the Eucharist. I'm sorry. So I'm about done with COVID video church. So, I think ALC has had a kind of baptism into what it might look like, right? To give up space, to make sacrifice. And my hope for all of us is that out of COVID comes a little, at least that experience, and then reflecting back, and like Ann said, well, could we put something up on the properties? Could we entertain the next time somebody comes to town? Do we find it easier to stick our hands up and say, let the RV sit in our lot? We'll call John and Laurel and Mary and see if we can get some staff supervision and figure out how to do it, because we did it once before and the church still looks pretty good. So that's my hope, is that this becomes a small metaphor or a small bridge for the church to think about how to do that, because it's very difficult. It would not have been so difficult had we been raised differently. But I was raised in communities where people spent $100,000 on lighting systems. When you're raised in a church like that, obviously it's going to take you a while to figure out how to help people without homes. So those are my things. Pay attention to what you're called to. Don't feel too guilty. Do what, and recognize that we would need to be really transformed as a people to figure this out. And then, of course, to say that hope is so possible. We don't tell you, I could tell you a bunch of horror stories. I mean, I've got so many horror stories from Karis over the last 10 years in the pandemic, but hope is really possible. We don't exaggerate. We don't lie about these stories. My house flooded, and the kid that helped clean up the house was a former house kid, and he thanked me. And then the next day, 2 people came to remove my flooring, and that guy was a house kid too, and he pulled out my flooring. They all have independent houses. And then that Sunday, a young woman called me who's up at University at Western, and we went for a walk, and she told me Karis saved her life. Hope is possible. Hope is possible. Transformation is possible. Other last questions? That's it. I went for 3 minutes, I think, on that pastoral run. So my apologies. It was a little indulgent. Other questions?
Oh, John, it's just been fabulous to have these presenters, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And this has been an amazing program. And I'm sure that if people do want to volunteer, they can do so, right, John? And can you in the chat or something how to reach you?
Yeah, just go to the websites. You can click on, we all have volunteer buttons. Homeward Bound does, Catholic Outreach does, Karis does. We're coming out of COVID. I think we're taking more volunteers now, finally. Click away. If you have property, donate it. We are ready to go. We need property. If you've got a couple of acres, that's great. If you're feeling like you want to empty, if you want to make somebody wants to make a $2 million contribution, let us know. We can build housing. We only need $600,000 to buy Victoria House. That's full price. We could house 8 people. We need another youth shelter because we're getting too many underages. We need an overage one. It's only 400, 500,000. There's lots of opportunities. You can also buy pizza for about $30. Whatever you want to do, whatever you feel called to do. And again, I think let's give ourselves permission to do nothing because God is saying to us, or we're saying to ourselves, I need to do less, not more. I need to do less, not more. So,
thank you, John. Thank you so
you.
much. Thank you. And as you know, tonight is the final installment in our pandemic forum series. And I would personally like to thank you for joining us tonight. Those of you who are participating tonight, we'll have some viewing later after this program as well. And so thanks to everyone who has participated and watched the previous 4 programs. If you're watching this one as well afterwards, we will continue to monitor the effects of the pandemic on our physical, mental, and spiritual health. And we hope to bring you another series as the topics develop. Special thanks to Matthew Miller, our producer, over these past 5 weeks from Shepherd of the Valley, and to Pastor Dan Carlson of American Lutheran for posting the videos for viewing afterwards. And thank you all, and have a very blessed evening. Bye-bye.